Right, so thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for the time for spending for the next hour on the planning playback. We set these sessions up mainly as Q&A. So as you'll be aware, when in round one of the planning consultation, we did the playbacks very early in the process to introduce the plan and to get people familiar with the documentation and the thinking. We've set the playbacks up this time somewhat later in the process to allow you time to read the documentation and hopefully to come with more specific questions that you might like to have answers to. So I'm here with my team to help provide any answers that you're seeking to get before you respond to the round 2 consultation, for which the deadline is next Friday. So that's where we're at the moment. The introduction is as per this slide. The main thing to say here is that in round 1, as you know, we provided relatively high level documents to get you used to the plan, to sketch out the way in which we think the delivery could happen, and to provide some sequencing and some indication of the tasks and the risks and assumptions that we're making in relation to that plan. And thank you to those of you who replied as part of round 1. The second round is a set of documentation which is progressed from that. As everybody would imagine, the planning process in a programme is very progressive and iterative, and as we go through, we get more certainty about the plan and the assumptions we're making. So the intention in round 2 was to provide some evidence of progress, and I would suggest that by providing a project plan document with actual dates in it, more thinking around the RAID items, more thinking and clarity around possible ways in which SIT could be entered and operated, and more in terms of clarity on the assumptions we're making in relation to migration, probably less so in the qualification area, and there may be questions on that today. So we have provided documents which represent, we believe, a progression of the process of planning, but it's far from over at this stage. And as we've said a number of times more recently, the important thing now is to work with you, with industry, to build a plan that you can believe in and buy into, which will require you doing some fairly, important feedback to us through this consultation round. The next slide, please, Joe. Round 2, the outcome of round 2 that we want to achieve is to identify what look to be the best approaches, the best or the most reasonable assumptions to base the plan on, and the right durations and ultimately dates as well, to minimise variance to the existing timetable, which is our baseline currently. And it's important to get the outcome of round 2 achieved in a reasonable way in order for us to move into a final round 3 consultation period, which is relatively short, and round 3 is more to do with kicking the tires on a plan that we are already seeing eye to eye on in terms of its credibility and it being realistic in terms of delivering the programme. So it's important that at the end of round 2, we take a loop round and see whether we have in fact achieved that objective. So we reduced the round 2 to 3 weeks to allow ourselves a little bit of time between round 2 and round 3 to absorb the information that you give us, hopefully a lot of information that you give us, and also to align back with all our key stakeholders so that we can go into round 3 on a relatively integrated basis and working in unison at that point. So there is by inference the possibility that if we don't achieve the outcomes of round 2 in the way that we suggest, that it may cause some issues in terms of going to round 3. So we are focused at the moment in getting round 2 done, and your help in getting the outcomes as we need them to be to continue to progress per the plan that we put in place. On the next slide is kind of background summary. So we provided that information with the dates, and as I say, we believe we progressed the information. It's still not perfect. The plan that we've called the illustrative plan still contains areas of uncertainty and arguable assumptions, and that's fine. That's what you would expect as we go through the plan. So we never expected round 2 to be perfect, but we do need something a bit more solid, as I say, going into round 3. So we've laid that out as best we can at this point. We've tried to outline the key areas of risk and assumption, particularly in the red documents, that should help you understand how solid that plan is and how it's not at the moment. We've also introduced what we call a challenge timeline, a PoaP 2, in the materials, which I'm sure we'll speak about today. The intention of the challenge timeline isn't to demonstrate a faster way to get to the end that we believe is realistic and achievable at this stage, because there's no specific evidence that supports that timeline. But it's important to challenge ourselves and for you to challenge yourselves about whether there are ways that we can do things that are closer to the timetable, as Ofgem, as our sponsor, has requested us to try to achieve. So the extra, more aggressive timeline is one that is what I would call the happiest path, higher risk. So it's not happy in that respect, happier in terms of time, and something that's got no contingency in it. And if everything worked perfectly and there were no big issues, logically, there's a sequence there to get from start to end more quickly. But it is only that, and it's more of a device to provide another data point and another reference point for you to provide a point of view and evidence as to whether either of these timelines is realistic and achievable. And I think what we've done is, as we said we would, we've reduced the number of questions that we've asked this time around, and considerably reduced it, in fact, but we've obviously targeted those questions in the areas that are most important for us to lay the plan out in the right way. And therefore we've asked you, and we've framed the structure of the answers that you give us more specifically. So there are less questions, but the answers will be significantly more heavier if the exercise is done in the way we're asking you to do it. And finally, and this has been said by Ofgem, but I would also support the view that, you know, we do need to have evidence, and if we get sentiment or opinion without any backing up evidence, it generally will carry less weight in influencing the outcome of the planning process. And actually, we had an interesting question in our last session this morning, where people were asking about, you know, how much weight we would give to responses. And what I would say is that it's really important to understand that we are just looking for those nuggets of information that will help us land this plan. It may be that of 100 people, that potential 50 people that might give us an answer, there might be just one participant who makes a really strong case about one element of the plan with really good evidence. That will be very important to us in terms of working out the plan. We are looking for those really important pieces. So everybody that responds may have something really important to say, and it will be given the appropriate level of weight in terms of our thinking, in terms of the plan. So we don't know where the information is going to come from, and not everybody will be able to give us that information, but it's really important that we get enough responses that the likelihood of getting those really important arguments as to why migration might take longer, or SIT could be done more quickly. It may just be one or possibly two participants that give us that information, but they will get weight in that, and their opinion will be sought and be reflected in the planning, because it's really getting something solid in the plan that we can all sign up to and be confident about the reasons for doing so. So I would say that, you know, for example, suppliers may have particular things to say about getting into SIT or wanting to be in SIT and how quickly DBT can be done. Suppliers may have a lot of input in terms of the back end of the programme and getting through migration. So it's really important you give us your views and you back it up with evidence, which I'll come on to in a minute. So again, as we said in round 1, but even more so in round 2, this is the tipping point. We get the information, the programme will then have to be more directive and start saying what we believe the plan will have to be after round 2 is complete. So this is the time, if people are worried about the weight of their influence, I would say everybody has weight and influence in round 2, past round 2 increasingly less so. And to be completely brutal, I think that's the reality, and I don't think I'm telling you anything you don't know. Next slide, please, which is really evidence. We said we would try to give you some clues or guidance on evidence that might be helpful. And in fact, we did ask Ofgem this question as well. And they said, and I can understand this, that the primary evidence we're looking for are plans. Now, we know that many of you are building and developing high-level plans, and that until we get to the M3 milestone, where everybody should have high-level plans, that's an ongoing process. But showing us plans, showing us work in progress plans, showing us thinking or estimations or assumptions that you're building into your plans, and referencing them to your delivery plans would be the best evidence that we can get. And obviously, with numbers and quantifying that as well as possible. For example, we said benchmarking, experiences you've had on other programs where you've had similar activities to do would be very helpful if you can show the numbers. So if it was migration, for example, migration of MPANs, if you've done this kind of thing before, what volumes and what rates, and bringing in experiences from other programs is good, but it's not opinion or qualitative comments. It's something that has evidence and numbers behind it. So we've tried to lay out a number of ideas about how evidence might be helpful, and actually the top ones are the most important and probably the bottom ones less so. So you can work it down from that slide. And again, we can have that conversation today if you wish. So that's the guidance that we gave on evidence. And then on slide 6 was the illustrative timeline that we laid out. And as I say, this shouldn't be seen as the default plan in the absence of anything better. The default plan is still the transition timetable. What we're saying is this is a way in which the programme could be delivered, in our view, with manageable risk, but at the moment doesn't have the underpinning support from you guys and from everybody else out there in industry. And that's what it really is missing to substantiate it and solidify it. That's really key. This is only an illustration. It can't be a plan because we don't have the evidence to support it. And we don't, as together with you, can go to Ofgem and say, this is a deliverable plan. It's the fastest we can go because of X, Y, Z. We don't have the X, Y, Z more specifically, as we need at the moment. And the final slide, which is the challenge timeline, which again, as I'll repeat, is not a plan. It's a happiest possible path based on logic and sequencing with high risk and no contingency in it, and assuming that everything goes perfectly. But it is an important reference point for your consultation responses, because if you think this can be done in elements, great, tell us why you think it can be done. We just don't want that you support it. We want to know why you support it, and at the same time, we want to know if you don't support it, why you don't support it. So we always want to get responses in the positive or the negative, irrespective of the question. Throughout the consultation questions, we've asked you for the evidence to support either response, positive or negative. I'm going to shut up at this point because we intended that we'd spend 15 minutes just introing this and getting the limbering up done. But this is mainly a conversation that for you, myself and my team are here to answer your questions or reflections on what you've seen and the work you're doing at the moment to build the responses to consultation. I would suggest that there's quite a lot of organisations on this call that didn't respond last time, and we would really appreciate it if you could this time. So it's over to you, really. We'll do the usual mechanism, which is hands up, and we'll take the hands up as they come, first served. We know that the first person to ask the question is always the difficult one. Once we get the first question, it kind of flows a bit better. So it's a question of who's got something really burning that they'd like to raise at this point. That'd be very helpful. I know my team are always tempted to stand in really quick for this, but let's go. Lucy, well done. Thank you.
It's not really burning, but it's a question nonetheless. My question is, for faster switching, obviously we had about 24 deflows to change, and on this one we're looking at in excess of 80 deflows. Now that's the same for everyone, because obviously from a supplier perspective. So are you anticipating all the suppliers to use that as part of the evidence in terms of the timeline that we're looking at? Or is that something that the programme would say, we know that we're looking at that alongside, therefore we have that as a concern or as a benchmark, if you will?
Well, it's a fact. It's useful to reference facts in your responses. It strengthens the evidence that you then use in response to a fact. So if it's a fact, then what's the impact on you in relation to that fact? But I would always include strong facts like this, because you know, it's important that all our senior stakeholders understand how much more relatively complex this programme is versus some of the other benchmarks. Don't assume that our senior stakeholders all understand that.
Okay.
That would be really helpful, Lucy, and that's a really good statistic. So, you know, internally, we've done quite a lot of work on comparisons with faster switching, because obviously it's the last thing that's in people's minds, and we've got a fair bit of knowledge on the programme of people. I mean, all three of us, for example, that you're looking at now, worked for many years on it. And so we've done comparisons like, you know, how many new interfaces are there on the DIP compared with faster switching and things. The deflows, we hadn't got a statistic on, so that is very useful. So anything like that would be really, really helpful.
Okay, great, thank you.
And then the corollary to that, Lucy, is where you can apply the metrics to substantiate any feedback on length of time, for example, for SIT or migration or any of those aspects. If the rationale is, you know, there's double the number of deflows, therefore, you know, we would expect the scope of testing to be blah and the runtime to be blah, or we've got this many process and flows we have to execute for the migration activity, our comparable activity for a bulk change of agent or a supplier of last resort event or whatever it might be. It's all about helping provide the evidence to quantify the timescales and support or otherwise the assumptions that underpin the schedule.
Yeah.
Is that clear, Lucy? Is that okay?
Yes, totally clear. Thank you.
Brilliant.
And on the other side, also, we are looking for good ideas as to how things can go quicker, because a lot of parties do want this done more quickly. And people have got out there, got good ideas about how it might be done, but with manageable risks, so not taking overly taking risks. So we have asked about that as well, because you know, we want, you know, the information that you give us is almost priceless, and it carries a lot more weight in some ways than what we produce as a programme, because you know, we want to manage our own risk and deliver this programme in a certain way. But the real value of industry telling us stuff is that it carries the most weight and the most credibility with the senior stakeholders that need to accept the plan, and ultimately Ofgem who need to approve the plan. So, you know, your info is much better than our info in terms of value to this process. And we would say that we got a reasonable number of responses in round one, but they weren't that helpful, generally speaking, if I'm honest. We are getting to that crunch time now where, you know, put all your eggs in the basket and show us, you know, you're providing this information on a bilateral basis. We're not sharing anything confidential with anybody. We will construct themes from the responses we get. You know, we got 36 responses. I'd like a lot more than that. I know it will cause us a problem as a team if we get 100 responses, but we are just looking for those nuggets. It may be in all those responses, we just get a handful of really important points where people go, oh, actually, that's a really good point. That will help us speed up, or that will slow us down. And there's no way around it. We just need to accept that that is the reality. And the credibility of your views on this is, I say, priceless to us. So we are really, you know, again saying, please give us this information as best you can. We have tried to target the questions so to make the workload more manageable. We do realize it's not a small job to kind of do that, but you are building your plans, or you should be building your delivery plans, even if you don't actually have them finalized. So stuff that you can show us that's come out of your planning process, and you will have these kinds of thoughts in your heads as you've been doing that. Well, just share them with us. You know, you're sharing with them confidentially, that we're just going to use the themes and the patterns of the responses to help build a plan, and then we'll be putting stuff in the plan you recognize and agree with. And we're not, you know, what we don't want as a programme team is be fighting with industry about what plan looks like. We should be joined up with you and agreeing what the plan looks like, and then our job is to get the senior stakeholders aligned with that and understanding what it means and why it's like that. And I don't feel we're anywhere near quite there yet, but round two is the time to do that. And I am optimistic that we can get a lot more from you guys than we've had so far. all good words, but it's not actions, I know. But you know, you've got a few more days to do the deeds. Any other questions that occur to people? It's getting to that time where we need to prime the pump, Kate and Jason. I think if there's comments that came out in the other sessions that might provoke some debate.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, sorry, it's Andrew here. I just wonder, so one of the agenda items was actually a walkthrough of the plan on a page. I just wonder if that might be worth doing, and identifying some of the pinch points that you perceive as the MHHS programme, and where you might want to see some movement in to the left, as it were.
Yeah, it's a good point. We probably could go through the plan on page 1, which is the plan, or one that we've evidenced. Yeah, so I don't know, it might be a bit of a Jason and Kate thing. Yeah, thank you, Kate. So if you start off, would be great.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, sure, Andrew. Yeah. So thanks, Joe. So what we've done in this one, and I'll probably spend a bit more time on this one than I will on the next one, because there's kind of, you know, there's much more supporting detail, and as Keith's been saying, this is more of a plan rather than the other one being more or less a timetable. So what we've done on this one is that in round 1 of the consultation, and based on all the feedback that we got in the planning working group, which worked really well, we've allocated, we've got a 5-month period here for impact assessment, planning and procurement on your part. Now, this is 5 months starting from when this plan starts, in other words, the beginning of November. Now, you know, we appreciate that you're already doing this. It's just that the plan starts in November, so that's the 5-month period. What we've said is that actually the first 3 months of that is critical in order to be able to start DBT. So it goes on into you know, into 2023. But after 3 months, you will have had enough of the impact assessment and the planning and stuff to start your DBT. So then the DBT takes 12 months. And that DBT is not all of your DBT. It's what is necessary in order for us to conduct SIT. So what I'm talking about here is you can see generally on this plan that there's a kind of a strand in the first few lines down to the first purple swim lane, other SIT PPs, which is about the path through with central systems and participants who are doing SIT. And then at the bottom, you've got the bottom 2, which is the qualification route, which is slightly different. So you've got, and I'll explain the difference between the minimum cohort and other SIT PPs in a minute, but you can see that the beginning of both of those swim lanes is exactly the same, that you've got your impact assessment, your planning, procurement, and then you've got your DBT. So, and then you've got an overlapping activity, which is the DBT of the supplier core system. So the difference here, and this is something that we didn't make very clear in round 1, and we've tried to make it clearer here, is that what we need to get into SIT is we need the services, we need registration services, we need data services, we need UMSO services, and so on and so forth. So those need to be done in order for us to do SIT. What we clearly also, we need the central systems, but here we're just talking about programme participants. What we also need on the supplier side is we need the suppliers' DIP interfaces. So where messages are being sent into the DIP, received from the DIP on the supplier side, all of that needs to be working and there in order that we can have a supplier participate in SIT. What we don't need for SIT, because SIT is validating the MHHS end-to-end design, and, you know, as per the architecture diagram with the pink shape on it, what we don't need for SIT is what we've called suppliers core systems, and that's essentially, you know, your billing systems, your customer correspondence, your sales management system, all of that sort of thing, that's not necessary for SIT. So that, you know, here, this is the fact that we've put it in a bar that starts slightly later. You might choose to start it at the same time, you know, entirely up to you. That's your choice. But what we're trying to point out here is that it's a separate and parallel activity. It's not needed for SIT. So then you drop into SIT, and the SIT runs for a certain period, and I'll come back and do a bit more detail on this. And then you've got, once that's complete, you go down into your preparation for go live, and then you've got your go live, and then you've got a 12-month migration period. And obviously the central systems are all needed for SIT, so they have to be ready. We haven't picked them out individually here, but they all have to be ready for SIT by this point. And I think on the next version, we're, you know, without trying to overload this with too much detail, we're going to try and point out where the DIP comes in, where the Elexon central systems come in, where the DSP comes in, and so on. So SIT. So you've got this term here, minimum viable cohort, and then you've got other SIT participants. So the idea about SIT is that in this PoaP is that we will encourage as many people to come into SIT as are interested and as can actually get there in time. So what, and when we say get there in time, bear in mind that depending on your role in MHHS, the point where you are needed for SIT will differ slightly, because there's a couple of months period at the beginning where we do what we've called component integration. And depending on which component you represent, you might be needed towards the end of that 2-month period, or you might be needed at the beginning. So at the beginning, we need the DIP and the Elexon central systems. We put those together, make sure they work. Then we take, most likely, we take the registration services, integrate that with the DIP, and so on and so forth. And we build up until we've got the whole ecosystem there. So you've got that 2-month period where things are building up. In addition to that, what we've said is that we will allow a month of a month as a grace period, if you like, where if you are tagged to participate in SIT, but you have a last minute problem and you get delayed and you're not there on the requisite day, then we will give you 1 month to catch up and come in. So at that point, Lucy, I'll come back to you in a second. Let me just finish this this bit about SIT. So once we've done the component integration, we then start doing SIT functional. And this is where in this PoaP, the idea about minimum viable cohort, or MVC, comes in. What we'll do in that initial part of SIT is we will very carefully monitor how each of the testing participants is moving through all the tests. And what we'll try to do is identify, you know, which supplier is moving really fast, which agent is moving really fast in the advanced, which is moving fast in the smart space, and so on. And at a certain point, you know, a few months in, again, you know, we're not sure when, but at a certain point, we will take stock and we'll say, okay, so this participant's moving really well. So is this one, so is this one. We're going to kind of make them into a bundle of the minimum viable cohort. And we're going to say, okay, guys, look, you knock yourselves out, go as fast as you possibly can and get SIT done. And that will be the end of, that will achieve the objective of SIT, essentially, because SIT is all about proving the solution. Now, the byproduct of SIT is that those who've participated and who've done all the tests are then considered to have done the equivalent of qualification testing. They still have to do the qualification, the procedural stuff, the SAD and so on, but they've done the equivalent of qualification testing. So the idea is that we identify people who are running really fast and we get them out of SIT as fast as possible. We get the central systems live, we get the MVC people live, and then they can start their migration early. They can gain any commercial benefits that they want to reap from having been in early with their new and improved tariffs and so on and so forth. The other SIT participants, we wouldn't stop them or anything. They came into SIT, and they can move forward as fast as they can. And they have then the potential to go live relatively early. And then there's the last bit, which is about the participants who choose the qualification path. So their opportunity to go live comes slightly later. Qualification starts when after SIT functional is complete. So you can drop into qualification, and we've put different arrows here to represent the fact that we're likely to have tranching in qualification testing. And then those participants can go live and start migration. So you do have a period where those participants who do their qualification very late and come late into live running will have a shorter period in which to migrate. So that's a consideration for your organisation. If you've got a very big bulk of MPANs to switch, you need to think about coming into the migration period as early as possible. So the only other thing to point out, and then I'll come to you, Lucy, is that at a certain, and it's not shown on this diagram, and it is something that we're showing, we're going to provide some supplementary information early next week that will kind of help you unpick some of this. But one of the things that we'll show on it, so this is showing essentially the programme's critical path. What we're going to try to show to you is a participant's critical path, which is not necessarily the same thing. And in particular, using the end-to-end sandbox will be an important thing that I think a lot of you will want to get onto, so that you can test all of your processes, because we don't know your processes. You're the ones who know them. You know what you've got to test. You do this in a professional manner. You've done this a million times. You know exactly what you have to test and what the changes are. And here's the testing service, the end-to-end sandbox, that you can use to do your own tests on. This is not mandatory. It's optional for you. We provide the testing service. It's a bit like what happened with the UIT environment in smart metering, that it's there for you to do tests. So as for SIT participants, they get the ability to start using that environment as soon as SIT functional is finished. If you're going the qualification route, you have to wait until you qualified to use that environment. Lucy, go ahead.
So my question was just around the pre-integration testing and how that fits in. Because obviously it's not showing as critical path, but from as you say, from supplier perspective, we need to pass that before we can go into SIT. So
yes, absolutely. So and that's a good question actually, because that's not called out here. So basically the pre-integration testing is part of what we've been calling DBT. So it's the part of the testing part of design, build and test. And I always think of it as probably like your UAT, it's your user acceptance test, because you're going to be, you're doing all your development work here and you're testing as you go along, obviously. But then at some point, you've got to put all of your systems together towards the end, everything together, and test your solution in an integrated way. And that's what the pre-integration test is. So it's really, it's the last part of that DBT.
And it's
maybe we need to make that clearer.
And it's part of the entry criteria into SIT as well, Lucy, demonstrating the evidence behind PIT.
Yeah, and also part of the entry criteria into qualification. Yeah.
We've not called this out on the PoaP, but of course it's called out in the actual Microsoft project document. Yeah. And we are very much recommending and strongly recommending you don't rely on the PoaP, but the Microsoft project document that actually does call out these activities clearly, that underpins this. The PoaP is just a way of kind of digesting this visually, but won't be the best basis upon which to base your questions.
Yeah.
Andrew, is that an old hand or a new hand?
No, that was a new hand. Yeah. So just a quick one. So I'm looking at this, and my interpretation is that whatever is needed. So you've got that line there that says DBT services and DBT supplier DIP interfaces. That's the sort of scope that would also be required to enter qualification, I assume.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
all of this. So this is a bit of an interesting issue, and they're talking about this in the qualification working group. So it's possible that that's the case. It's also possible that depending on how the qualification is scoped and carved up, it's possible that in order to enter the qualification testing, that you need to have demonstrated your back end processes as well. Because the one of the things that we're very very keen on, and in fact it's kind of enshrined in the qualification process at the moment, and it's a little bit different from faster switching, where faster switching didn't really, it just looked at the interfaces in terms of the sort of UEPT and so on. It didn't look at all at back end processes, back end systems. But we, our view is that having your back end processes and systems ready, and us as a program knowing that you've got them ready, is a really important thing, and knowing that they're ready for when you go live and so on. Now, so testing of those back end processes, that will be demonstrated as part of qualification. It's unlikely to be required in qualification testing, where you can see the qualification execution here. It's more likely to be provided by evidence that you provide, which can come from pre-integration or whatever. So the answer is, don't really know exactly at the moment. It may be that we go into the qualification testing with just your interfaces done, but that you separately show that your core systems are up to scratch. Don't know. So that's all to be worked through with, in conjunction with the BSc, obviously, because they're the guys who own this after all. We're kind of the, if you like, the pullers together or coordinators as far as qualification goes.
But I suppose the reason I hooked onto it is because if you go through SID, you don't need to do qualification. So you wouldn't expect an extension from what is required to do SID to do qualification.
And that's a very good point. If you go through SIT, you don't have to do the qualification execution that's shown on here. What you do have to do is you have to do the self-assessment process, because everybody has to do that. And the way that I think it will work is part of the self-assessment process will be demonstrate that you've got your process, your billing system updated, demonstrate that you've got your sales channels all updated and things like that. Yeah. So that stuff will not be in the qualification test, which you can see on here as qualification execution, but it will be a part of qualification that everybody will have to demonstrate. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you. Yes, that does make more sense. I think so. I mean, at the risk of stating the bleeding obvious, that qualification scope is a key piece of understanding for participants.
No, and I absolutely appreciate that. And I think, it's so I think the thing is that I think when, obviously, it's the BSc that owns the qualification for the BSc. There's also, there's SEC aspects, there's REC aspects. So what we've got to do is somehow coordinate the putting together of all the different bits and pieces. But ultimately, it's the code bodies, or maybe that's the wrong word. It's the, it's the PAB of RECCO and BSc and the SEC panel of the SEC that own the qualification, because after all it's they who need to make sure that the participants are operating adequately according to their codes. it's not down to us. You know, it's obviously we've got this coordination because we're a big change and so on and so forth, but ultimately it's down to them. So pulling all that together will take a little time. So no answers yet, I'm afraid, and I don't think there'll be particularly any answers in the next round either. So I think, you know, and I think I said this on round one, that qualification is one of the things where we acknowledge we're having to make some assumptions, probably more assumptions than we are on other areas, as far as this plan goes.
Yeah, I understand the challenge, Kate. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Gareth, go ahead.
I know I keep asking this question. I'm going to ask it again. Migration, 12 months. How are we going to test all those assumptions regarding migration, phasing, taking 12 months, requiring people to run parallel systems for a year, all of those type of things? Where are we going to really get into that and assume we've got the right answer on that?
Do you want me to pick that up, Kate?
Yeah, go for it.
Because I mean, we've been having those discussions under the migration working group, Gareth, and we've been having quite a few bilateral discussions with various parties as well. At the moment, we don't have the evidence to change the assumption in there that was in the transition timetable for 12 months. And it is one of the areas we would really like some evidence back from parties on whether the 12-month period is a practical and reasonable period, given some of the experiences that people have had with other migration activities like replatforming, supplier of last resort, bulk change of agent, all of those processes that you know and love, Gareth. So at the moment, we are gathering evidence through the migration working group, through bilaterals, but this is the opportunity for suppliers to come back and provide us with the evidence for how long they think migration can take. There's a couple of things in here on migration that I would have got to on the left to right walkthrough of the plan after Kate's bit on SIT, because as you can see on the difference between the blue bars and the purple bars, if you go through SIT, we have retained a 12-month migration period at the end of SIT at the moment, but there is the opportunity for it to take a bit longer because you've gone through SIT earlier. You've got that additional time before you hit M15 to potentially use. If you go into qualification, the reverse impact applies. So as you can see on the purple bars at the bottom, if you're one of the later participants through qualification, you actually have less than 12 months to execute your migration process. So if your DBT is going to take longer because you've got a more complex supply chain and it's going to take longer to mobilize your agents or get your own systems ready, and you're in that qualification bucket, if you're in a later tranche, you actually have less than 12 months. So, and this is a very blatant call for evidence from everybody that if you do believe that 12 months is not long enough, and you can quantify comparative exercises from other migrations that demonstrate that longer is needed, then this is the chance to get your evidence in and for us to collate and present that evidence back to Ofgem, who will ultimately be signing off the timetable. So I know it's a very leading question, Gareth, and it's quite a leading answer, actually, to be honest, because it sort of goes back to Keith's message: help us to help you here. If you don't believe that's long enough, we need some backing evidence.
I think that's a really good kind of ask. However, I don't know many people have anything like the scale of information you'll need. I mean, I don't think anyone on this call will have done anything more than a few 100,000 meter points at most. I suspect it'd be more like in the thousands or tens of thousands. I think then comparing it to tens of millions. I think my worry is if we just leave that as it's 12 months because we're doing the other bits first and we're looking at those bits first, it's going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it will take 12 months because everyone will be built to that 12 months. And that's what, and I think we do lose an opportunity to maybe try and find some time here, because I know it is a different thing, but I don't know of anyone who's taken that length of time to do any form of migration before. And and we have done some very complex things in the systems, which don't necessarily mean rebadging sites, but we have done stuff as complex, and we have done it literally overnight in a big bang scenario, or 2 or 3 days. So then 12 months feels like, it just feels like we have to build an awful lot of superstructure, and everyone has to do an awful lot of work to provide a 12-month run-in. Whereas,
So I think, yeah,
when do we?
Anything you can provide on that would be great, Gareth.
Yeah.
I think what I would say is, you know, we have been having bilateral discussions with some of the large suppliers who've gone through some of those larger exercises. I think there would be really interesting input from some of your constituents around some of the more complex sites as well. We are working on the basis that the 2 mod proposals, P432 and 434, get approved, and we get some of those more gnarly sites out of the way earlier, and unmetered supplies as well. But there are some constraints across the system on as a whole that have been highlighted to us around, particularly around NPRS, and also, you know, some of the current restrictions on bulk change of agent processes, and DTN constraints have all been highlighted to us as potential volume constraints in the end-to-end system that we need to manage. So if you don't think that some of those constraints apply, or you think we've got a different way of doing it, please let us know, because we are trying to bring these timescales forward. We're not artificially trying to push them out. If there's a way we can pull it forward and do it in a more compressed timescale, we would really like to hear it.
Okay.
I'd also say that even if you think some of the examples you have are a smaller scale, they're still relevant to us, because we can extrapolate, we can make assumptions based on even smaller examples. So don't be shy, don't withhold things that you think might not be relevant, because for us they might be.
I mean, I've certainly passed that through to constituents when I see them in a couple of weeks. It does feel like, if we don't give this some focus at some point, and I know the migration working group's working on these things, however, I think migration working group is also starting from a certain point, which is, we've got this period, we're going to do it in tranches, we're going to do it this way. They're not stepping back and saying, is this actually the best way we should do this? So I think it'd be it was definitely something I'll ask. However, I do, the constraint issue, if that's the blocker, and if that feels like to you that's the blocker in terms of capacity and volume, it is going to be hard to find someone who's actually hit capacity and volume requirements in the same way you will. But we'll ask the question. So as long as it gets some proper focus on the actual fundamentals of this process at the end, that'd be really helpful.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
And just one thing to add, Gareth, I do think so. What you've just said really supports some of the things we've had in bilateral conversations, which is that we do need to think about migration differently for advanced and unmetered compared with smart, and we've certainly had a view expressed which kind of chimes with what you're saying, which is that if P432 and 434 are implemented, then you're going to have a nice clean set of data, and it actually, you know, it could be done much more quickly. I think, but equally, and you probably won't have seen this, but equally on the smart non-smart side, we've had a lot of conversations which say, you know, the quality of the data is not great, and it will take that length of time, if not longer. So I think we do need to look at it on a segment basis as well.
Can I just add a couple of things? Sorry, just to supplement that. In the migration working group, we now have published the processes associated with migration, Gareth. So there is a business process now set out for migration using change of agent or using change of supplier.
Yeah, I've had a look at it. Yeah.
And we've also got a process flow associated with reverse migration. We haven't focused a lot on reverse migration in this discussion thus far, but that is a fundamental underpinning principle of the plan, that we are executing reverse migration to facilitate early move. But the approach that's set out for migration at the moment is that we use those operational processes in order to migrate using that change of agent and change supplier process. So it's not intended to do any backdoor scripts in order to execute migration or anything like that. It is intended to use the processes to do it, and that was one of the conclusions out of CCDG from the early work done in the programme. So just hopefully setting a bit more context on the whys and wherefores of it.
Okay, thanks.
I think you probably know all of that anyway, Gareth.
Yeah, I do. It's becoming the thing I'm getting really kind of interested in is how we're going to do migration, because whatever we do is whatever the plan decides, whatever that's fine. I just don't want to have this conversation in 18 months, 2 years time when we go, can we, now that we've gone through a lot of testing and integration, we're all feeling very comfortable, is there a way we can maybe speed that up a bit, and then we'll start hitting blockers which we created for ourselves 2 years ago through not making the kind of a real focus on this right now. But that was really helpful. Thanks, guys.
That's absolutely spot on, and I think how smoothly it goes depends on how much how good we can get the data quality beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, Kate. And there are data cleansing activities associated with the new data items for MHHS as well, off the back of BSC change proposal 1558 and REC change proposal R32. That does have a set of data cleansing activities associated with the new data items as well. So that is of paramount importance to make migration go smoothly. Yeah. And we are assuming that is done as a key dependency.
Yeah.
Again, it's highlighted in the Keith will always talk about a schedule's only as good as the RAID that underpins it, and he and I wholly agree on that. So you'll see on the dependencies, we have highlighted a dependency for migration of having that data cleansing exercise completed in a robust way.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful.
Seven minutes left. We don't have to use them. Any other questions? I always say at this stage, if you aren't comfortable raising a question in the group but would like to separately raise a question, do contact the PMO mailbox and they'll point the question at the right member of the team, and we'll come back. Equally, if there's a particular conversation you want to have for us to hop on a call and speak to you, then again, let the PMO mailbox know and we'll do our best to try and accommodate you. We are just here to try and help you through the process and get the best outcome of round two. And we've got a lot of money on this one, haven't we, in terms of getting information on into this plan. We recognise it's not perfect at the moment. There's a lot of gaps to fill, but we're not going to do it ourselves if at all possible. We want you to help fill gaps with us. So I think the message has been clear, and we appreciate you turning up to join us with this one. I think we've got, how many left? I've lost count now. I think we've done 5.
There's one more, I think.
One more. That's right, yeah. So after that, good luck for next week. Please, for this constituency, please try to provide more responses than you did in round one. That would be really great. Thanks very much. Have a good day and enjoy your weekend when you